This week's episode of the ArtTactic Podcast is brought to you by ArtTactic.com, where you can now find our latest reports, including our resale analysis from the June auctions in London. We take a look at several works that had previously appeared on the market and show how they performed this time around. And by being a loyal podcast listener, you save 15% on this report and all reports on ArtTactic.com by using the promo code PODCAST15. Thanks for listening to the ArtTactic Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. As the art world begins to wind down for its annual summer break, we had one final major market moment before the pause, the June auctions in London. These sales were once among the most significant of the calendar year. In fact, I remember when collectors would regularly travel to London after Art Basel just to view the auction previews. But over the past several years, these auctions have declined in prominence, with major auction houses scaling back, and in some cases, for example, skipping evening sales altogether. Each auction house has taken a different strategic approach to this post-Basel slot, and while the total sales volumes have dipped, I do think these auctions still offer valuable insights into where the market stands. In this week's episode of the podcast, we're joined by Kabir Jhala, art market editor of the Art newspaper. Together, we recap the London sales and discuss the key takeaways before the summer hiatus. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much for listening. Kabir, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Adam.
Absolutely. I'm sure it's been a really busy few weeks with Basel and then these June auctions, so we appreciate you taking some time to chat with us. So over the past several years, we've seen the June auctions in London seemingly decline in significance, with auction houses scaling back their offerings and in some cases skipping evening sales altogether. And as a result, the overall sales totals have fallen. What exactly is happening with this auction season, and how much has it changed over the last several years?
Yeah, thank you, Adam. I think it's absolutely fair to say that we're seeing differing approaches this season as we did last season in June. So just a little snapshot of how the sales went. So Sotheby's and Phillips both held evening sales. Christie's, for the second year in a row, has not held an evening sale in June in London. And so we can get into why that is later. But so Sotheby's made 15.8 million, so 62.5 million with fees. Phillips made about 6.5 million hammer. In total, that's down 27% from last year. And that itself was a decrease from last year. So as I said, Christie's is for the second year in a row not staging an evening sale. And instead it staged a day sale that was live with an online component that made sort of around £9 million. I think it's important before we get into the weeds of all these sales to really take it back to 2015, 10 years ago, but also the year before Brexit. And, you know, comparing the figures now to 2015 really shows you quite how much these sales have dwindled in terms of importance. So that year, Sotheby's made about £200 million. So compare that to around the 62.5 million with fees that it's made. So that's, you know, more than a half decrease. Christie's made around 166 million that same year. We can fast forward to 2019, so post-Brexit, and each auction house has seen their totals slash in about half, and also far fewer lots being consigned. So these sales have sort of been in a difficult position for a while now. I think it's interesting to point out that this actually isn't the first time that Christie's has not held a June evening sale in the last 10 years. So 2017, the year just after Brexit, they decided not to stage an evening sale again, while Sotheby's and Phillips continued with their sales. And the reason for Christie's pulling out of this auction season, at least what they say, is that June is increasingly difficult to get consigners. So what Christie's tell me is that the concentration of quality basically ends up at Art Basel. This is also post the major New York sales. So, again, consigning top lots to auction are quite difficult. People are sort of distracted. They're in the mood for summer. Their minds aren't really perhaps on consigning and buying works at auction. And then as a result, stepping out of these sales gives Christie's more of a focus on the October sales. And I think that's obviously interesting in terms of the strategy. So an auction house like Christie's stepping out of June, therefore is able to double down on October and provide presumably a much better offering, and therefore sort of make up the loss that they're having in June in October.
Yeah, it really seems like the auction houses have taken very diverging strategies when it comes to these June sales.
In 2019, I think it was the last year before the auction houses sort of started smushing together the Impressionist and modern and post-war and contemporary categories together. Christie's and launched its 20th century and 21st century categories. There used to be individual sales in June of Impressionist and modern, and then post-war and contemporary. And now we're just seeing just one large evening sale. I think that obviously speaks to the fact that there is thinning stock among the Impressionist and early modern category. So, you just have to sort of combine it with the more, with the post-war and contemporary where, works are more readily available. I think in terms of estimates, we are seeing some consigners agree to more favorable estimates. It has done certain artists really well. At Phillips, there was a Martha Youngberth that was estimated, I think, £50,000 to £70,000, and I think hammered for about 250,000. Did extremely well as one of the top performers of this season. Youngberth is obviously probably quite a sensible buy. She's a very established artist. She's backed by a major gallery with Tadeusz Ropak, and in terms of her trajectory, I mean, she's only going up. I think she made her auction record just last year. But so yeah, if a consigner is willing to give an attractive estimate, that attracts some heat. In terms of reselling, I thought it was interesting. We saw virtually no flipping. No work consigned to either auction had been sold publicly in the last 5 years. So I thought that was also an interesting sort of facet, that the auction houses are less concerned, or I guess, less willing to take work that's been exposed to the public auction market recently. One other thing I noticed in terms of strategy was that, Sotheby's especially really focused on quote unquote fresh to auction works. I was speaking to the advisor, Charlie Wood of the Fine Art Group, and she did note that actually a lot of those classic works that actually didn't perform very well, talking about the Jenny Savile juncture at Sotheby's, the £4 million Basquiat at Phillips. There was also Matisse at Sotheby's, Women with the Green Umbrella. Those were all works that had been offered in the private market or, with a gallery at a major art fair quite recently. That Jenny Savile had been with LGD quite recently. The Basquiat at Phillips had been shown with TFAF. I think that Matisse was on the private market. So again, I think buyers realize that they're in a better position than they were a couple of years ago, and they are able to basically get the best works in the market. There's fresh to work, there's fresh to auction work. So if a work has been exposed, they're less interested in it.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear just how much the June auctions have changed over the years and how different the auction houses have approached this time of the year. Given all of that, what would you say are some of the leading reasons why sales totals are down so much during the June season?
So I think obviously there are the perennial reasons that have always been the case for the last 10 years that are sort of being exacerbated in a down market. So as we just said, that post-New York, post-Basel moment is difficult to consign. And obviously, auction houses are struggling to consign major works to public auction. Then obviously you also have just a shifting calendar and geography in the last 10 years. We've seen Hong Kong rise up as an auction center, and New York only get stronger. Paris is also increasing in terms of importance. So all those things do ultimately compete with London. So while those auction houses might well be making, decent totals overall, it's just a shifting level of importance of London. And as Christie's, is very keen to sort of assert, London has historically been the only city of the four major art market centers, New York, Hong Kong, Paris, London, to have these three marquee seasons. Otherwise, these cities really have two. So Christie's justification for removing their June evening sale is basically to align their calendars, just so each city has two seasons. Then, obviously, I think the bigger thing that we all have to take into account that the auction houses want to talk about less is Brexit. And so, yeah, talk about 2015 being that year that we last saw really, really good totals achieved for these June London sales, because ultimately Brexit did, put a sledgehammer to the art market, especially at the top end. Red tape and extra taxes. We've just seen imports slash year after year. It's becoming a less viable place to sell very expensive art. We've seen the auction houses' net profits in the UK drop year on year since Brexit has come into effect. So it's no wonder as well that these London sales aren't doing so well.
And so I think everyone seemed to look at Art Basel and try to understand how things went in order to gauge where the state of the art market is at the moment. Did the London auctions feel consistent with the mood and dynamics that we saw during Basel?
It's interesting. Yes and no. I would hasten to sort of make very comparative analogies between the London sales and Basel, insofar as Basel, I think maybe you will agree with me, we did see the galleries again bringing their very best work to the fair. And these London sales are not where, a seller would consign their best work. That being said, I think that we absolutely saw some dynamics that were playing out on the fair floor at Art Basel, also definitely translate into these sales. Price sensitivity was, increased price sensitivity among collectors was certainly something that we saw in Basel. And works that were priced too ambitiously in the London sales typically did come under estimate. That urgency has left the market. We talked a lot about deals being struck in Basel. There were advisors are talking sort of about a 20 to 30% discount or flexibility sort of being more available. And we did see some great deals, I think, in these sales. Hammershoy for Lynette Yadumbiachi. A lot of work was coming in underestimate that would have probably done a lot better a few years ago.
So I know you've already touched on some of the artworks that were for sale this auction season, but what were some of the most closely watched lots heading into the auctions, and how did they end up performing relative to expectations?
I thought a lot of the highest prices achieved actually weren't standouts in terms of the prices that were actually made. I'm talking about primarily the Tamara dell'Empicca, which was the top lot of this season. And that made £7.4 million against a £6 million to £9 million estimate. So, hammering at just above its low estimate. It's an extremely attractive work. It's small, but its place within the artist's career is also really significant. It's a portrait of her mistress, lover, and muse, Raffaella. And also it was a poster of a play that was staged on Tamara dell'Empicca's life recently in New York. So it's very visible. Obviously, the size of the work is quite small. I think the issue that we saw with that was that probably to consign the work, Sotheby's had to offer a very confident estimate. And so you sort of took a lot of heat out of the room immediately. So it did find a buyer, but, realistically, it probably should have been estimated at sort of somewhere between 4.5 to 5 million low estimate. And then it would have sort of cleared that more gracefully. I think another fleshy nude that sort of followed that same trajectory of perhaps a too confident price that then led to, shall we say, quite anemic bidding was Jenny Savile's Juncture. So again, a very classically fleshy nude by Jenny Savile. And Jenny Savile's having a total moment right now in London. She just opened her major solo survey at the National Portrait Gallery. Obviously, that also means a lot of the major collectors of Jenny Savile are in town in London. So in theory, she should have had quite a lot of bidding in the room. Juncture, ultimately, it hammered below low estimate. It sort of made 5.4 with fees against a 5 million low estimate. Again, it was probably just too confident of a price. But interestingly enough, Jenny Savile's Mirror, which is a drawing huge drawing, about 8 feet wide, did far better, and it exceeded its high estimate. It went for about 1.7 million pounds in Hammer. And I think that was another trend that we saw this season, which is that, historically, people have spent a lot more money on paintings, and they still continue to, but the market for works on paper in the last 5-10 years has certainly picked up. I think there's a sort of growing consensus around collectors that it's arguably better sense to buy a first-rate drawing than it is a second-rate painting, and we saw that again. Savile's Mirror, that drawing did a lot better. There was a Basquiat drawing at Sotheby's that did extremely well against its estimate compared to, say, the painting that was offered at Phillips. In terms of just the standout of this season, I think that was Marlo Moss. So she is a not super well-known painter, and her painting White, Black, Blue and Red from 1944 came up with a 200,000 to 300,000 pound estimate, and it ended up making about 600,000 pounds with fees. She's a really interesting artist. She's an early 20th century artist, and she moved to Paris in the 1920s, was in that whole avant-garde moment. She's associated with the constructivist and De Stijl schools, and was absolutely a contemporary of Mondrian. Scholarship sort of agrees that she introduced the double line into Mondrian's work as well. He was sort of influenced by her. But she was a woman. She was also queer, so maybe that was part of the reason that she was overlooked. And then, quite crucially, so she was Jewish, and she fled Paris in the 1940s to Cornwall, where she spent the rest of her life. And in 1944, her studio was destroyed in a bombing raid, and so a lot of her work was then completely destroyed. And so, as a result, her work very rarely comes up to auction. And she's in the midst of a career revival right now. And so thought that is really interesting. I think that's really led to a lot of strong bidding with her work that we saw this season. And I mean, if you compare her work to Mondrian, so what she made about 600,000 pounds for a very large work in great quality, compared to Mondrian, who's valued at sort of $40 to $50 million, it's still a steal. So I think that was another interesting work.
Yeah, leading up to the auctions, it was really interesting to research and learn a bit more about her practice. And it's an easy Google search for any of our listeners. It's a really fascinating artist and story. And clearly there is an influence there on Mondrian. So as we wrap up this round of auctions, do you get the sense that the auction houses will stick with their current approaches to this post-Basel June slot in future years? Or do you think we might see some adjustments to their approaches after this year? Or is it too early to tell?
I mean, to some extent, it is too early to tell. And obviously, I'm going to offer two sort of answers. This is the answers that are given to me by the auction houses on record and to the press, and then what I privately suspect. And so, obviously, they're not going to be super vocal with me on record about whether they think that they're mistaken in having taken these two approaches. And obviously, both auction houses on record are very confident in the reasons that they've taken. So Sotheby's, Ottilie Windsor, sort of head of contemporary, very passionate in her defense. She said that we've made 62 million pounds of business this week that we wouldn't have otherwise. Whereas Catherine Arnold, sort of, I guess, her parallel at Christie's, has sort of talked about the fact that having these two sales in the year in London is about being, quote unquote, responsible to the market. She says we are responding to our clients by not overloading the market and putting together thoughtful sales of quality in all sale locations, responding to demand, blah, blah, blah. And I think an interesting, fact, if we wanted to take it, as to whether Christie's is justified in doing so, is that if you sort of do a calculation of the hammer price versus low estimate of all the works that they've sold in the post-war and contemporary and imps and mods over the last couple of years, it's actually increased year on year from 2023 to now, I think from 103% to about 119%. So that would be, I guess, their justification for saying by concentrating on quality, by reducing the number of sales, we are able to also give our clients better returns on the work they're consigned. I think it's important to also look to October's sales because, if you're not staging a sale in June, then by logic, you're going to basically be putting all those works that you could have consigned in June into October. And yeah, Christie's now typically has a much better, bigger sale in October than Sotheby's does in June, about like double the amount. I'd written it down somewhere. Yeah, there it is. It's so last October 2024, Christie's made 81 million with fees versus Sotheby's 37.5 million. So that's about double, right? So clearly, if you're, taking away the business in June, you're just going to make it up in October. My guess, or rather the question that I'm really thinking about, isn't to do with how it's working in total sales and whether it's working for the consigners, but the profit margins of the auction houses. Because obviously staging an evening sale is it's more costly. The overheads in terms of staffing and marketing are more than they would be if you just had a simple day sale. And so I do wonder whether, Christie's choosing to have 2 sales versus 3 is also allowing them to have a healthier profit margin overall in London. I mean, you're asking me in the last couple of years, the business decisions that have been made by Christie's have certainly made more sense, shall we say, than the ones at Sotheby's that have sort of perplexed a lot of market onlookers. I mean, we think about, for example, the very strange decisions they had with buyer's premium that they sort of then reneged on. So if I was to sort of decide, and having judged these June sales for the last couple of years, I wouldn't hold a summer auction either.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and we'll just have to see what they do next year. So as we head into the art world summer break, what do you see as the key takeaways about where the market stands right now? Are there any signals from these auctions that you think maybe will shape the mood heading into the autumn season?
I think that the market just makes more sense, and that's something that all advisors and most dealers are sort of conveying, that a logic has entered the market that was missing for the last couple of years as prices went into frenzy. We're certainly seeing still a bit of a standstill between, I think, what consigners are willing to part with and what buyers are willing to purchase. And the trade is sort of caught in the middle of this. Obviously, you see with the auction houses that clearly, I think to some extent, they want to offer lower estimates, but they're not going to be able to get those top lots. Dealers, obviously, which are able to be more flexible with their prices, are certainly doing so. I think I was looking at the ArtTactics best performing resold lots, and it was Agnes Martin, Elizabeth Payton, Marley Moss. So, if you have been holding on to a woman artist who is doing well right now is your time to maybe consign it to the block or to a gallery. I think overall, we're certainly also seeing auction houses and galleries just continually evolve their business at an increasing rate. As closing a quote by Catherine Arnold, she did say our strategy needs to evolve. Things that worked 15 years ago won't work today. I think that we see that all across the board. All the galleries are shifting what they're offering. I think the auction houses are continually having to reassess their strategies. It's shifting sands as ever.
Kabir, thanks so much again for coming onto the podcast and helping us recap these June auctions in London, the last major market moment before the fall season. If our listeners haven't already, they should definitely check out all of your coverage in the art newspaper. And where can we find you on social media?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram. It's at Kabye_West. It's like Kanye West with a B. I hasten to add that I chose that handle many, many years ago. And on Twitter, I'm at Kabir Jhala, just my name.
Great. Thanks so much again, Kabir. Have a great summer.
Thank you so much, Adam. You too.